Welcome to Leadership Talk, the official Waymaker podcast, the place for conversations about leadership, strategy, and technology that help make business improvement business as usual. Well, welcome to Leadership Talk, the official Waymaker podcast. I'm your host, Craig, and with me in much warmer, sunny Queensland is Stuart Leo, CEO and founder of Waymaker. How are you, mate?
Very good, Craig. How are you?
Yeah, I'm excellent. I mean, I haven't just got over COVID, but you have.
Yes, I've had Sure, why not? Yeah, let's talk about my private health. No,
because you're going to be coughing and sputtering your way through.
I've only got half a voice left. I just had it was my turn. Person 3,000,000,001 or something, to get the special COVID cough. But hey, I'm alive. Many people haven't, so I'm very happy for our amazing scientists that have have built the vaccines to keep us all healthy.
Good on you, mate. Hey, this is the last episode of this little mini series that we've kicked off.
That's
over
true.
Over the last couple of episodes around the 5 leadership postures. And we've talked around the idea of the curious leader, the persistent leader, the empowering leader, the wise leader. And this episode, we're going to talk about the inspirational leader, which, hopefully is everybody at all times throughout the entire process of the organization. But in particular, the inspirational leader is what we've dubbed the leadership posture in this mastery stage of the organization. So, Stu, do you want to give us a high-level idea of what it is that we're going to tackle today?
Well, I mean, that great intro, it's exactly that. The big idea is we want people not to just be one-dimensional in their leadership, but to adapt their leadership posture to the stage of growth that their organization is in. And so if you've been with us on this journey, thanks so much for coming on the journey with us. We're talking about the inspirational leader, which is the leader who has mastered mastery, who is now leading a market, community, and transforming how people live and work. So, we want people to be inspirational at every stage of the journey, but there are certain leaders from, and we're going to talk about some big leaders today. We've actually picked a couple of people that we're going to delve into and use as examples, but you don't have to be that globally known person to be an inspirational leader. You could be a community leader, a not-for-profit, a public servant, a business leader. It's entirely contextual, but what does define this stage is that somehow you've changed the marketplace or the community and you've transformed how people are living and working. So you've not just built a great organization or a great business and had great success. There's been an impact that you and or your organization have had, typically through your organization, that has now changed the marketplace, the community. People live and work differently because of what you have done. And that's kind of the entry criteria, or rather exit criteria to this stage. And so you could think about people like that. As you're listening, you might be thinking about names around the world, the Steve Jobs, the Obamas,
Let's go Jeff Bezos,
big names that have transformed marketplaces. But there will be people in your local community, community leaders who have done the same kind of thing. And don't not put them in this stage. I hope that's what you're hearing me say here. We just talk about those global leaders because they're a hook we can hang off and help people understand. But you don't have to be a globally relevant leader to be at this stage. You need to have created transformational change, and that can happen at the community level all the way through to the global level. Does that make sense?
So to summarize, you don't have to change the world, just your world.
Yeah. Actually, no. The point is somebody else's world.
Somebody else's world, the world that you're in.
Yeah. I mean, your world has changed because you're a mature leader. You've probably hit peak career already.
Yeah.
So your world's changed. You've got payback. You've got all the social and financial and personal rewards from being a mature leader, expanding the organization. But actually now we've kicked into this other space where you're actually not just leading your organization or a team, you're leading a marketplace or a community or a nation or an alliance or an industry. This is where you've taken on a space and a place that's outside of what you're hired for.
Mm-hmm. So the case studies that we're going to talk about today are big names or big organizations that you should be able to identify with, not because that's who we're wanting you to be necessarily, but because most people will know who we're talking about.
Yeah, and hey, don't strive for greatness either. Be some of these people. Don't worry about being that. But it's not an exclusive club to global billionaires or heads of state. There are many people that are inspirational leaders that are not billionaires. So we do want to emphasize that it's about leading industry, markets, or people groups, and you've used what you've built to do that. And that's kind of exciting because people build organizations to change their customers' worlds. And when that expands and delivers, you are transforming, really transforming, hopefully for good. Not always, but hopefully for good. So let's jump in and talk about some of these people, and let's pick up, our characteristics and learnings and risks and rewards.
Rocks, paper, scissors, Stu? Or you want
all right.
Okay.
How do you do that on an audio podcast?
Okay. Paper, scissors.
All right.
What did you do? I won.
Yeah, you won.
I won.
I was
scissors.
paper.
Scissors beats paper.
You go first.
So the leader that I chose, Stu, for this conversation is a woman called Melanie Perkins. Now, if I say that name, you may not necessarily know who I'm talking about, but she's actually the founder or co-founder and CEO of Canva, which you may very well know what I'm talking about when I say Canva, which is basically an online web-based platform for design for non-designers, basically would be my summary of it.
That's a great example, isn't it?
And now she, along with her now husband, and there's another co-founder, which I'll have to look up and double check on, basically started this, I don't know, basically it's a competitor for the big companies like Adobe, saying, basically because she felt that there was a hole in the market for design needs that didn't require a huge learning curve for new software and didn't necessarily, require design skills, degrees, that type of thing, to basically, churn out some of this stuff. So they kicked off, and they kicked off in 2013. So it's less than 10 years. And now they have a market valuation of around $40 billion. And they really have disrupted the market, or actually created a new segment within the market of the design space.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think I think Canva is a fantastic example. I've been a customer of Canva. And for all those reasons, that's like, okay, experts are going to be using Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign. But actually, the vast majority of stuff that needs making, you don't need those tools to make. So talk a little bit about the problem they've solved and how effectively they've built out a new market segment. But then how was it transformational? How did they cross the line from being just a great business to actually transforming the marketplace and how people live and work?
From my understanding, it had a lot to do with their business model, where they actually opened up what they would call freemium, a freemium business model, where a lot of people would have access to a lot of tools for free. And if you wanted to dive deeper, then you started paying for it. But then large organizations paid for the use of these tools as well, within their marketing teams, which allowed them to work, across timelines and internationally and that type of thing, share and collaborate. And really I think the business model gave them critical mass of users. And then as the platform started to mature, more and more organizations jumped on board as a simple and easy way to create effective digital design content for, everything from social media to, web banners to website content, et cetera, et cetera.
What it did really, wasn't it? Before Canva, if you needed some good looking images, not average images made in, say, Microsoft Publishers or something, you would have to go to the design agency or to the ad agency, and or a freelance designer, and you'd say, I need some images for Facebook or whatever it might be, or I want to do a basic smarter presentation. Or you would have to go outside of your workspace and commission and pay for work from somebody else. But in reality, all these young digital marketers who were not designers and people who weren't in that traditional space now had access to a tool to actually do what they needed to do quickly. And that, I think, was transformative, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it also was completely web-based, which probably couldn't have happened 10, 15 years ago. The Web 2.0 world enabled people to actually create really sophisticated software that was based in the cloud, rather than something that people had to download. So it was quite accessible as well, I think. And so what they actually engaged the designers to come up with the frameworks and the templates, and then allowed access for anybody to be able to use them with very, very little barrier to entry. What
were some of the breakthrough moments, for Canva? And you've picked Melanie as a leader, So what were the breakthrough moments that you saw in this journey, in this story, that, okay, they've gone from being a good business to being an inspirational business, because now they're changing the way people live and work?
Yeah. I mean, I think that her journey I love the fact that, according to Forbes magazine, she was a university dropout, right? So, she had an idea, she invest in it. They actually started out creating this software framework for a different application, which was to create yearbooks. And so, and you hear this with a lot of startups, entrepreneur, biographies and stuff like that, that the thing that they ended up being famous for was based on something else that didn't quite have the market fit, right?
Yes.
And it was tweaked and it was tweaked. And I think one of the things that she was able to do was actually to get in front of the right people that were able to believe in the concept and the idea and actually fund it. Provide angel funding. And when you read the story, she even learned. There was a lot of there were some investors that were really, really passionate about kite surfing, and she had no idea. But she basically went out and fast tracked learning kite surfing so that she could actually have a point of connection with some of these people that were eventually going to invest in the business and the idea. So taking an idea that probably wasn't the finished product, but getting belief from people that could actually invest in the business, I think was really, a critical point. And I think the other thing is that, she talks about herself when you read interviews that, she's not in it to make money, which is, fascinating. I'm sure, she wants to pay the bills and all the rest of it. But she's probably worth over $8 billion now. Like personally, and she's like, I don't know what to do with all that money. Like, actually she does know what to do with all that money, but she doesn't need it all herself. So, having a, an organizational value or vision that's beyond, maybe just providing the service is pretty critical too. Like, in terms of its, market value. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think the vision for Canva has been to democratize design and give people who weren't natural designers the ability to get a good outcome, a great outcome. And I think so often in marketplaces, when one or two companies, have locked up a marketplace, like so in professional design, it's Adobe and who? What? Is Coral Draw still around? I don't know.
No, it probably was. It probably was that back in the day, right? But Adobe became a very, very clear leader in that space. Yeah, and there's a couple of other people sort of vying for that, which have little niche markets, but nobody's really challenging them on a major scale. Yeah, like maybe Canva is.
Yeah, and so I think what Canva has done, it has given people a way to do great design without. It's kind of like what Microsoft did with the Word document. Here's how you can self-publish a professional-looking document, and you don't have to be a typesetter. That was transformative to the world, and I think you wouldn't have thought that you could still have those kinds of problems solved in today's world. But I think Canva have done for design what Microsoft did for writers, and gave the common person the ability to design something that looks good. In the same way the common person can write something and it reads good. And
if we go back to our ideation phase, it was a valuable problem, right? Yes. It was a problem that was worth solving, which was designed for the rest of us. That's type of thing, right? Yeah. So that starting with the right idea, I guess, if you're going back to posture one, correct, and then stepping through that process, finds themselves in a pretty amazing space where they don't even feel the need to go public, because their business model has been able to sustain them, through the different growth phases of the organization. Yep. And they're definitely a market leader now in that space because they've created that space.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, kids today are learning how to use Canva, before they're learning how to use Photoshop products
or Illustrator or any of that. Yep.
Yeah. Which means, what are they going to use? They're going to use Canva. And so if you think about the next 10, 15 years of Canva, they will absolutely have the capacity, should they want to take on some niche segments and start to eat up some profitable but adjacent markets. And there's a very, very, very big market to eat away from and create. And I think that's what they did well. They actually created new markets, new types of designers, as opposed to just taking business away from the professional designer. That I think is what's been quite powerful here. So I reckon
there's one more thing worth mentioning, which is probably more of a philosophical thing. And Apple have done it, Microsoft's done it, IBM probably did it back in the day or whatever, which was that sort of long play of introducing products to kids in schools early, so that they became so well adjusted to those tools that when they actually got into the marketplace, it was a kind of a no-brainer to continue to engage with those products, whether it was Apple products, Microsoft products, or in this case, something like Canva. My 12-year-old, all of her, design work required for all of her assignments are all done through Canva.
Yep.
Which is the recommended tool for the students. So well played.
Yeah. I think yes, well played. So tick, inspirational. It's changed the way we work. It's changed the way we design. Yeah. That's amazing. That's transformational. Yep. Okay, so we've put Melanie in some pretty good company here.
Yeah, it's good because who have you decided to highlight, Steve?
I went and picked Winston Churchill.
Yes.
So we've got a
young entrepreneur.
Yep, young female entrepreneur with a old stuffy man. But I mean, I think so. Let me justify and substantiate the case.
That's right. Yeah.
I actually think there's not been a statesman who has had more impact and influence on other statesmen than perhaps Winston Churchill. He has transformed the way statesmen state, if I can put it that way. And so, let's pick up a few things around, Winston Churchill. So who was he?
Yeah.
He's credited with leading the Allies to victory in World War II, which is absolutely his credit. He was the Prime Minister of England, Britain, United Kingdom. Let me get that right. And it's important to note here that actually his leadership leading up to that point was actually not that very good.
Right.
He was actually a bit of a pain in the ass to work for, and he didn't have many successes. In fact, when we look at the life and the journey of Winston Churchill, when we say that name, what comes to mind for you? What thoughts and things?
World War II.
Yep. Yeah. What else?
Honestly, the Crown.
Okay. All right.
No. He was like, I see him. The imagery that I get is slouched over in a leather chair with a cigar, grumpy. But world-changing speeches. Amazing orator. Yeah, clearly a visionary or an inspirational leader.
Yeah. So yes, all of those things. And let's pick up some of his realities and faults, and then pick up some of the things he did well. Because as a leader of a nation, an organization, he made some pretty big mistakes early on that he actually learned from in his leadership journey. So he wasn't the Prime Minister when war was declared. That was Chamberlain. And so for 9 or 10 or 11 months, Churchill was actually he was effectively the head of the Navy. He was running naval operations once war was declared. And he was really bad at it. He didn't listen to the experts around him. He made a lot of mistakes. Once war was declared, he had a different view to the Prime Minister, and so he wasn't protecting the merchant navy. He was off chasing down U-boats. The merchant navy was getting taken out left, right, and centre. He personally oversaw and led the naval operation to protect and defend Norway, which was an unmitigated failure and loss when the Nazis went and took over Norway. And he was so indecisive and ineffective in that strategic planning process. There was confusion in the British forces on the ground. It probably cost the defence of Norway. He really didn't have a great track record. He had made some fundamental errors. But what he had got right was his visionary reading of what was going to happen from the early 1930s through to the 1940s and 50s by looking at what Hitler was doing. And he was one of the lone voices against Hitler in the 1930s. He was actually kicked out of politics for a period of time. And in the 1930s, he was very active in talking about how Nazi Germany was remilitarizing, how Hitler was building a new generation of people whose highest moral code was to die in battle for the kingdom, for this future nation. And so he was raising the alarm bells for 10 years. He was trying to get the political world to listen. And so as Chamberlain, as history has shown, failed in his ability to placate Hitler, and just so many mistakes from Chamberlain in being a weak leader. Even though Churchill had actually had quite a few mistakes, when it came time to restore trust and faith in a new leader that would take on Hitler, the one thing he'd got right was kind of the one thing that mattered. And so he was seen. And actually his journey is fascinating, because it was only within a few weeks of taking over the prime ministership, after some fatal errors, that it was 3 weeks off Dunkirk. That was one of his first major operations. And so he was put to the test pretty quickly, and he was really given a nation on its heels. It was inches from occupation from Nazi Germany. And he did a number of things extremely well as a leader that he had done extremely poorly as a leader, but he had learned from. And so one of the things he did well was he could speak. He was the capacity to communicate as a leader. And so it was his speeches, and it was that famous speech that when he stood up in Parliament, we will fight on the beaches, we will fight in the hills, we will never give up, we will never surrender. That speech, which was the speech that galvanized the Allies against Nazi occupation. But in that speech, what he was rallying the British people to be that which was required to defeat the Germans. And he had to say, although he had had a successful evacuation of Dunkirk, in that speech, he had to say, you do not win wars with evacuations. And he knew he had to turn the people. He had to, although that had just dodged this massive bullet, quite literally, he had to actually help the people think about and be a group of people that was required in order to defeat. And so he was masterful at painting the picture of who you could become and the role you would play in order to defeat. Does that make sense? You got to remember the British were at this point almost a year into the war, on death's door, a lot of failures. And he turned around and painted a picture of who they could be and drew on whom they had been in the past when they were at their best to say, now step into these shoes. Do that which you can be. Find your role. And that was what that speech did, and it was galvanizing. So number one, phenomenal orator. And number two, he learned from his lessons. He actually was quite pig-headed when he was running the Navy in the early stage of the war. But it was his war cabinet that was a critical masterstroke. And he set up a structure with his war cabinet, which was about actually bringing in those that could make decisions. It started off as 9 people. He shrunk it down to 5. And effectively, he created a new role in the government called Minister of Defence, which he gave himself. And he ran this war cabinet, this new form of cabinet, in order to get through the war, which was the command centre. We've talked about command centres in the past. It was down in the whilst the bombing of London was going on, it was down in the underground, amongst the train stations of Westminster, that he was able to build this command centre. And he actually learned that, the art of that war cabinet, from Lincoln, coming out of the Civil War, where one of the things Lincoln had to do was to navigate, when he's coming out of the American Civil War, navigate people who disagreed with him, both on his side and the other side. but his job was to unify and birth this new nation. And so what Lincoln did was he brought some of his greatest critics into that room. And what Churchill did was he brought those different voices in. So as a leader, he actually he didn't create groupthink. He allowed this command center to have objective voices, whether he necessarily agreed or not. Now, he was also brutal in how he managed that. There was, when it was at a group of 9, there was one in particular, and I've forgotten his name. I'll go and research it afterwards, who was prone to leaking and being too adverse, and he ended up on a special envoy to Singapore. And so he was very good, as all good leaders need to be, in being a butcher of the team as much as a builder of the team, cutting people out when people needed cutting. But so I think as somebody who's transformed, so for example, when George Bush, George W. Bush Jr. was speaking after the Two Towers fell and was rallying the Western world to this new war on terrorism, who did he quote? He's quoting Churchill and referencing the themes coming through because he was calling a group of people to become something that which they are not yet. And interestingly, just a few weeks ago, when Zelensky was speaking into the British Parliament, who did he quote? He's falling back on Churchill's famous statements around morality and justice and goodness and not surrendering and holding that ground. And yes, very, very important to quote that and build those themes into the speech he's giving to the British Parliament. So I think when we step back and look at Winston Churchill as a leader, he was by no means a perfect man, but he did some things extremely well as a leader that transformed how other leaders have led in those critical moments. Does that make sense?
I've got a couple of questions around that. One of first a statement, observation. I once heard someone talk about leadership and they just used this line, your greatest currency is inspiration. Because ultimately you cannot twist someone's arm with an unlimited paycheck. Maybe you can, but people will, if they're not sold behind a vision and a direction, especially this generation, they'll go somewhere else, right? So the inspirational leader, someone who can actually clearly articulate, this is who we are and this is where we're going, is worth more than a paycheck. True or false?
Yes, undoubtedly, absolutely, completely true.
Yeah,
and
okay.
I think inspirational leaders have learned the art and are now applying that art into more than their organisation to help people be something which they can be but are not yet. And so they've learned how to do that. They've learned, what do they say? Great leaders see an organisation not for which it is today, but for that which it can be tomorrow. And the only way you can do that is to build the people. And you've got to be able to see that at the organisational level and at the human level. And so Churchill did some really fascinating things during the war. Just after they'd got out of Dunkirk and they'd retreated, they knew that the next stage of the war would be an air war, that the first waves would come from the airwaves, and so they needed to ramp up the Air Force. And actually, what Churchill did was he actually went and got the most successful media baron on Fleet Street, who was running what was then the highest circulation newspaper in the world, and said, "You're amazing at productivity and efficiency and organisation. We need Spitfires. We need aeroplanes. Fix it. And he took him from the business world and went, no, you are a successful Fleet Street media man, but now be whom you are called to be. And I want you to transform the way we build Spitfires. And he led that transformation over a summer. Over the course of one summer, he upped Spitfire production by 50%, to the point where there was enough aeroplanes ready for the Battle of Britain. And so Churchill's thinking around, the traditional thing to do would have been to appoint, a new air marshal from within the Air Force to do the traditional thing. And he looked outside his traditional spaces and found somebody who could solve that problem and put that person in there to do it. Does that make sense?
My next question about Churchill was, do you think that he exemplified the 4 other postures? Or by his own admission, do you think that he fell short in those areas?
No, I think he did example those other postures. And one of the reasons I like him as an example of an inspirational leader is because he actually wasn't a great leader outside of war. He was a good leader, but he was only an inspirational leader in that context.
Yep.
And his skills and his qualities and his attitudes and his stubbornness and his demeanor, he was the right man for that job at that time in history.
Yep.
But as history kind of points out, even though they'd beaten the Nazis and it was all done and dusted, he was ready to keep rolling on through, and he was planning takeover of Russia off the back of the success in Central Europe, and had to be pulled back. And he earned a reputation as a warmonger at the end of the war because that's where he was meant to be. And so he was actually not a great peacetime leader. He was not an inspirational peacetime leader, but he was an inspirational wartime leader. And so as an example of that, I like it because, yes, he's exampled the other stages, but he's not, you wouldn't go, oh, he's top of the class.
Yeah.
In the other stages.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't even go, gosh, he's top of the class in this peacetime context. But my goodness, if you've got a crazy fascist bearing down with millions of soldiers trying to take over your country, yeah, I'm going to stand up beside and behind Churchill every day because of those qualities. And so he was geared for that moment. And he transformed the way people, that example I said before, my short-term memory is terrible. About the Fleet Street media baron who became the Spitfire kind of production expert. Bush pulled the same tactic when he put Donald Rumsfeld in as Secretary of Defense in the United States for the war on terror. Now, some might argue that was a positive or a negative, but it was Churchill's influence to say, look for the operational experts to solve your problem and don't confine your mind to these spaces. His impact and his effect on statesman leaders are, for the last 100 years, 80 years, is phenomenal in that context.
So his legacy, has he created a better world as a result of his?
Well, I think that's an easy tick. Most definitely. It's yes.
So we talk about like the must-do actions, which we've spoken about, the rewards, which is the legacy that we leave, the risks we've also spoken about, especially in terms of Churchill, ego, pride, or staying too long.
He had all of the above. Yeah. And he needed some coercing at times. He needed good people around him. But he did. He stepped aside. He realised.
So the learning outcomes then, like he left well. Did he leave well?
Well, I think no prime minister leaves well. What was the great quote from John Howard to Peter Costello? Now we're going to get into Australian politics. Sorry for our international. remember when John Howard here in Australia, this is back in the late 90s, early 2000s, Prime Minister for almost 16 years. And Costello, who was his treasurer, Peter Costello, and the man appointed, everybody thought would take over and make that move for leadership, and he never did. He never toppled Howard. And I remember it could have been Turnbull, it could have been Abbott, it could have been one of these other guys, it could have been Rudd. And it was, the role of prime ministership is never one that's given to you. It's one that's always taken. And if you do not know how to go and take that ultimate leadership position, then you don't deserve to be in that leadership position. And so I think a leader never leaves well in that context, because you're always taken down.
It's almost like, but knowing when. Perhaps.
Correct. Yeah. And I think, Howard should have stepped aside because he ultimately lost his seat, caused disarray. Too Australian now, but Churchill was the same. He lost. He got booted out. He wasn't the right fit. But then, as time flows, his legacy is: no, you are the right man to do the right job at that right time. That's your legacy and your reward. You don't need a legacy beyond that. And so I think that's important. Then you can leave well. Then you don't go and meddle. You can step back and be that statesman of your community or your industry or statesperson. So did he leave well? I think he left as well as any potential prime minister can leave.
Hey, I'm going to throw a curveball right at the end, because we've gone over time anyway. If people are still listening, then they're fully engaged. So they won't mind a little bit of a curveball. Did Jack Dorsey leave Twitter well? Like, did he choose his exit? Given the narrative around, I have dated this podcast straight away. But let's what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think he should have got out there. Should have left Twitter long before that.
Yeah.
And I think. Do I think Twitter is a great platform? Yeah, I do. I've got a Twitter account. Am I active in it? Not really. Why not? Because I think it's a different kind of platform today than what it was 5 years ago. I think he would even acknowledge right now. Well, he did, didn't he? Over the weekend, he came out bagging the Twitter board for not accepting Musk's offer, probably for completely fiduciary reasons, irrespective of your politics on the left or the right side of the political spectrum. The Twitter board just took a poison pill approach, which is self-destruction. I mean, there's only one way out for Twitter right now, and that's either death or rebirth. And rebirth doesn't always come. So,
that's a fascinating one. We need to watch this space. That might be a brand evaluation. One of Stu's classic brand analysis reviews at some point down the future.
Yeah, but people will be talking about Mark Zuckerberg in the same way. We had a big discussion about Facebook just recently on one of the podcast episodes, because this is the moment where Zuckerberg's actually, I think, trying to become an inspirational leader. I don't think he is an inspirational leader. I think he's a phenomenally successful leader. His product has transformed the way we live and work, but I don't think it's inspirational yet. And I think he's looking for that. He wants to make that next transformational thing. So that could be ego or pride driving that, or it could be real market. Who knows? I think we'll have similar conversations. But anyway, I digress.
Yes. All right. So we've given two examples from very different spheres of influence on the inspirational leader, which is a posture taken at the mastery stage of the organization, which is where you lead the market and you transform how people live and work. And you're creating new and exciting ways of doing things, and hopefully leaving a legacy of a better world in your wake. The challenges are that you can be prideful, ego can kick in, you can stay too long, you can, celebrate your wins, not watch your back.
Correct. Yep. And the great wins, the great outcomes are very much around leaving well and reinvesting into the next generation. That's it'll be interesting to see how Canva reinvests into the next generation. What Melody does through that leadership. I think there are phenomenal leaders that have reinvested into the next generation extremely well. We could talk about this forever, but I think Jack Welch is one of those other inspirational leaders from the 20th century for what he did with GE, and his reinvestment through education and learning and leadership development in his latter years, I think outweighs almost everybody's impact. What he's done there has been quite spectacular. So there are certain inspirational leaders that really have given back and that we can all learn a lot from. And I think it's the legacy and the giving back that possibly does define the inspirational leader.
Well, just to tie off the Canva story then with a bow, I believe Melanie has pledged 80% of the profits of the business into the Canva Foundation, which is about reinvesting in the next generation, which is impressive. And I've only just researched a lot more of her for this podcast. But like the more I read, the more I've gone, what an inspirational leader.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So that kind of, Stu, that pretty much summarizes our 5 postures of leadership. Over 5 or 6 episodes, we gave you an introduction. We've sort of deep dived into each of them, and we've got some what's the word? Trajectory towards. Oh, I was doing so well.
You're right.
Towards some future episodes where we're going to unpack it a little bit more.
Correct. What can you do with this right now? Where can you go? You can go and grab our resource on Waymaker Academy on the 5 postures. There's some tools in there to help you think about your current strengths, your current weaknesses. Might be a conversation you want to have with other leaders around you. Perhaps create a leadership team, sit down with them, talk it through with a mentor. Think, and here's the big idea. Where is your organization on the leadership curve? At what stage of growth is your organization at? And therefore, where does your organization need you most as a leader? What posture should you be exempling? And what posture do you need to be moving towards in order to lift your organization forward? And that's the leadership challenge. And that's what I want to leave listeners with now. Going, okay, I need to align my posture to where my people need me today. And then I need to lift my own eyes to shape that posture for the future to where they'll need me tomorrow. But I need to be today where they're going to be tomorrow. And so you've got to be at least that one step ahead on that leadership journey, because you are the one that will draw them. You are the one that needs to see the organization, not for what it is today, but who it can be tomorrow. And that means you need to see yourself first and foremost, not as who you are today, but who you need to be tomorrow. And every organization transforms and grows through the transformation and growth of its leaders. You need to start that journey.
Awesome. If you know your posture, you know how to make business improvement business as usual.